From there, it was a very quick indoctrination into the understanding that, yes, our government was actually involved in studying UFOs, again, in the vernacular, we call them now UAPs, and that these things were real. And not only that, but they presented an air flight safety issue, that we had been looking at these things for a very long time, that the government took this very seriously, especially the potential capability for UFOs to interfere with our nuclear strike capability.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. It's a great pleasure to welcome Luis Elizondo, the author of the new book, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. It is entitled Imminent. This is a man who was the head of the Department of Defense's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. As we will learn in our conversation with Lou, the Pentagon loves acronyms, but that's it spelled out. Lou, congratulations. A very good evening to you. I take you to a moment that you record in your new book that was a challenge. You were stepping into a new world out of the Army that you'd served and the Defense Department that you'd served. You wrote a resignation letter, October 2017, to General Mattis, who was then, at that point, the Secretary of Defense. And in the body of the letter, very carefully argued, the department must take serious many accounts by the Navy and other services of unusual aerial systems interfering with military weapon platforms and displaying beyond next generational capabilities. What was that, Lou, and why did you resign with that in your letter? Good evening to you.
Good evening. And Mr. Batchelor, thank you so much to you and your wonderful audience for having me on your show this evening. It is a true pleasure to be here with you. I think it's important to understand that in order to understand why I wrote what I wrote, it's also important to understand where I came from. My father was in the Bay of Pigs invasion in the Brigade 2506. He was a prisoner, political prisoner of Castro, and we came to this country, my family, in exile as a result of that. And so this country, at a very early age, my father taught me that this is the only country in the world that would or could give us the opportunities that we have. And so I've always been very, very loyal to this country. I joined the Army immediately after college, and then after there, I became a counterintelligence special agent. And serving my nation has always been a privilege for me and a great honor. And so early on in my career, I had the opportunity to serve with Jim Mattis when he was a general of the Marine Expeditionary Unit, the first unit really into Afghanistan, into Kandahar, Afghanistan. And the organization I was with, the task force, was directly supporting his efforts on the ground. And so I learned firsthand, working with General Mattis personally, the incredible amount of character this gentleman has, also the enormous amount of intellect. And I respected him tremendously, not just as a military leader, but also as a human being, an extremely, extremely learned man. And the one thing I learned during my time working with him, and then later again in the Middle East, was that General Mattis was somebody who wanted more information, not less. He was a man who wanted all the data so he could make an informed decision. So later on in my career, when he became the Secretary of Defense, long story short, and I had a new position there at the Pentagon, our paths crossed again. And I was working a program with other colleagues of mine called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And yes, you are correct. We love our acronyms in the Department of Defense. In essence, it was a UFO program in the vernacular. We were using taxpayer money to study UFOs. And it seems a little bit of a contradiction, because the Pentagon, on one hand, didn't want to hear about it and wasn't taking it seriously. And yet, on the other hand, we were being paid and given resources to take the threat seriously, because we had near-air collisions, and there was a lot of interesting data that we were gleaning from these technologies that were basically flying unimpeded over controlled U.S. airspace, over sensitive military installations, and there was very little that we could do about it. And so ultimately, I wrote a letter to the Secretary of Defense after months and months and months trying to get the chain of command to take this topic seriously. And I resigned. What you're referring to is my resignation letter to the Secretary of Defense, basically telling him, for the record, look, we've got a problem, and you're going to want to be briefed on this, because right now there's so much associated stigma and taboo surrounding this topic, even though that the government does take it seriously and has historically taken it seriously, that for whatever reason, the bureaucracy inside the Pentagon doesn't want you to know about it. And I saw that as a dereliction of duty. I saw that as a failure of the bureaucracy itself. And that is what you are referring to in my resignation memo, is basically an appeal, a last ditch appeal before I left the Pentagon, and telling him, look, sir, this is real. You have people and resources being used to look at this issue, and you're not aware of it.
As evidence of what Lou says, that letter did not reach General Mattis. He never saw it before Lou was out of the building. We go now to a day in 2008. You're in a building in Arlington, Virginia, rented by the Pentagon. Your job is counterintelligence. A knock at the door, your assistant says there are people here to see you. One of them is a pseudonym, Rosemary Kane. The other is Jay Stratton. They introduce you, a counterintelligence officer, a combat veteran. They introduce you to something that at that time is called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. Ask you if you're interested before they tell you what it is, before they read you in your vernacular, Lou. I'm picking it up as I read your book.
Yes, sir.
What was that at the time? What did you make of it? Why did you go with them, Lou?
Sure. Well, it was actually in 2000. So I came to back to the Pentagon after serving a tour over at the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI. And so I came back in 2008. It was actually early 2009 when that conversation began. And it's not unusual when you are in certain positions in intelligence that other organizations will try to leverage some of the talent within other organizations. In my particular case, I was a senior counterintelligence officer. And from my understanding at the time, they needed somebody to run counterintelligence and security for this new quote unquote effort. They wouldn't tell me what it was. They didn't tell me anything about it. And it was, honestly, it was a little mysterious, but not really that uncommon, because until you get, as you say, read onto a program, there's very little you can talk about. So the very first few meetings is more of an assessment, getting to know one another. Are you going to be a good fit? And then ultimately they asked me to meet their boss. And that's really when I learned firsthand what they were focusing on. And so several weeks went by, and I went to an undisclosed location in the DC area. It was a covered U.S. facility, meaning it was a secret U.S. facility. It was a normal building, but inside was doing secret stuff. And I met the director at the time of OSAP, and his name was Dr. Jim Lakatsky. He was, I would submit to you, probably the world's premier rocket scientist, and I mean it literally, rocket scientist. This is a person that could explain to you the burn rate of a first stage solid rocket motor booster, the reentry trajectory of a multiple reentry vehicle nuclear warhead. I mean, this was the best of the best. And after a conversation with him in his office, I remember him looking at me over his glasses and looked at me dead in the eyes, and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yes, sir. Sure, you can ask me anything you want." He said, "What do you think about UFOs?" And so I thought for a moment, and I responded truthfully. I said, "Sir, I don't." And he said, "You don't what? You don't believe in them?" And I said, "No, I didn't say that, sir. What I said is I don't think about them. You asked me if I thought about them, and I don't. I don't really have the luxury to. I've never been really prone to science fiction as a kid. I've been too busy, frankly, serving my country and doing other things." And he said, "That's fair, but let me just warn you. Let me give you a piece of advice, Lou. Don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, because you may basically come into to access to information that may really challenge your understanding and any current narrative you may have on the topic." And I found that very interesting. And from there, it was a very quick indoctrination into the understanding that, yes, our government was actually involved in studying UFOs. Again, in the vernacular, we call them now UAPs, and that these things were real. And not only that, but they presented an air flight safety issue, that we had been looking at these things for a very long time, that the government took this very seriously, especially the potential capability for UFOs to interfere with our nuclear strike capability. So that was very concerning from a national security perspective. And yet this entire endeavor was being done sub rosa. We were being given taxpayer money to do it. We had support from leadership. We just weren't allowed to talk about it. And therein lies part of the challenge that we faced in the program.
I'm speaking to Luis Elizondo. Lou, the book is imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs, which is really inside the Pentagon's hunt for clarity, for transparency. Because Lou is read into a program that has a history, and he's learning it over weeks and months. At the same time, he's being told other possibilities for the phenomenon that we recorded as a child. I call them UFOs. I'm trying to pick up the new language, UAPs. We begin with Roswell. That was the summer of 1947. And you've heard of it because it's had TV shows and movies made about it. There's an exchange that Lou has at one point early in the book. He says, "You mean Roswell is real?" It's a wonderful question, Lou. What did you learn?
Well, I was shocked, as you can imagine, because you hear all this Hollywood tall tales about the Roswell incident, and it's to the point where it's almost become a bit of a joke to discuss. And I learned very quickly that it was not a joke at all. In fact, it was very, very serious. And the reason why it is considered a joke now is because there was an active campaign to discredit it. But the reality is, if you look at Roswell and you look at New Mexico, this is right on the heels of World War II. And we had just entered the atomic age, which is very significant because that's actually when we started noticing an uptick in UAP activity from a governmental perspective. And so it turns out that one of the only locations in the world where we had a delivery capability, meaning the ability to deliver the atomic bomb, was in Roswell. We had these modified B-29 bombers. I'm sorry, very near Roswell, actually. It wasn't actually in Roswell, but it was not too far from Roswell. These B-29s had a very special capability to deliver an atomic weapon. And that's where they were stationed. And it turns out that there was some testing being done in Roswell. I talked to a very senior colleague of mine and scientist who worked on some other former government programs involving the UAP topic. And he said definitively that Roswell wasn't one crash. It was actually two incidents. And more importantly, that there was actually biological evidence recovered from these. It was taken away, the material, the crash material, and secured at a U.S. military base for study. And then very quickly, there was a counter narrative that was put out to try to quell some of the public interest and curiosity and potentially a little bit of concern to try to minimize what the incident really was. And yes, I was shocked. And I will also submit to you that learning that was really just the tip of the iceberg. Every day was something new. Every time we saw a new video coming in from the field of a forward-looking infrared or gun camera footage or radar data or pilot testimony, it became increasingly compelling and also at the same time frustrating because you had this counter narrative that was being put out by elements of the intelligence community and the Pentagon to diminish the seriousness of this topic. And yet we were reaching this operational crescendo where more and more incidents were occurring to the point where they were literally at one point for months stalking one of our nuclear carrier strike groups, even all the way out to the Middle East.
There's a list of incidents in Lou's book that help you understand the scale of these unexplained moments and who is not responsible for not telling the public. There's the Congo in March of 52. There's DC itself in July of 52. There's October 54 in Florence, Italy. It goes on all the way to the 80s and 90s. And invariably, there's an explanation that's given to toss it aside. It's a balloon. It's birds. It's lights. You made it up. Something's wrong with you. The stigma grew. But at the same time, I learned from Lou that presidents were being briefed on these matters. I begin in the 50s. That's Truman and Eisenhower. Two more straight-speaking men I cannot imagine. Were you flabbergasted when you learned that the presidents had been told?
No, I wasn't actually. I was actually relieved, to be honest with you, because that means at that point the bureaucracy is working. My concern is when the bureaucracy doesn't work and those who are in a need to know, whether it's the gang of folks in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence or it is the president and the executive branch, there are individuals in our government who have a requirement to know these things from an oversight perspective. And when they're not being informed, that's when I get concerned. If I could, I think the concern I have regarding narratives and counter narratives is that we were spending a lot of time and resources historically for decades as a nation looking into these things. And you're right. There was this narrative saying they're balloons or it's hogwash. Let's put this in a very logical perspective. There's only two possibilities, and this is what I had to explain to several generals personally. I said, "Look, sir, either these things are real, and what people are seeing here, what we're recording on radar and electro-optical data is correct, or it's all fake." Which means one of two alternatives. Meaning, if it's all fake, that means or it's a hallucination or mass delirium. That means thousands of people in the U.S. government with top secret security clearances, with literally their finger on the nuclear button, are all having the same mass delusion. These are people that are fighter pilots that are trained to fly live munitions over our cities and our populated areas, fight and win wars on our behalf, and they are all suffering from the same mass delusion. Now, I don't personally know what's more of a concern, UAP or this notion that everybody is suffering from a mass delusion and they're all crazy. And oh, by the way, they are part of our nation's most sensitive operations, right? So that's all it can be. It's either real or it's not. And if it's not, this is your alternative narrative. And I've saw enough information myself, my colleagues did, where we know for a fact this is not a mass delusion. It is
30 seconds, Lou. 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. That's it, really. The bottom line is that this is real. We have multiple sensor systems recording the same event at the same time, at the same place, under the same circumstances. So if this was a court of law, we are well beyond reasonable doubt.
The book is imminent. Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. Luis Elizondo is the author. Lou was many years at the Pentagon and is familiar with the protocols, to be polite. And the day he delivered his letter, he expected anything, but he knew he was taking a risk with his career, with his family's fortunes, with the future for his daughters. And he took it because to stay would have been to live in denial, as apparently a number of your seniors were able to do successfully for many years. So what happened next is not predictable. It's the part of the book that I said, really? This happened? That happened? Within months, the journalists have it. A woman named Kane, a man named Blumenthal, and most importantly, a star reporter named Helene Cooper. And they learned Lou's story, and they learned the story of the Pentagon not being candid, to be generous. And it wound up in the New York Times. Wow, Lou, well done.
Oh, I can't take credit for that, sir. That is, I think, a combination of the reporters and also the interest by the American public. All I did was play a small role in that and provide the information that they were asking me. But I had really nothing to do with the New York Times article coming forward. I cannot take credit for that.
It was the revelation of your program that was the breaking news, and then the storytelling, which had been in information available to the public, but it was always being told it was swamp gas, or you're seeing things, or those lights in the sky were a reflection from an aircraft going by.
Right.
However, that wasn't enough. There's that wonderful scene in the original Body Snatchers where our hero escapes having his body taken over by these alien creatures as his girlfriend's body is taken over. And he rushes to a phone booth and calls the White House. Give me the White House. We're being invaded. You got to do something. Lou, I learned from you that nothing would have happened. That phone call would have been.
Yeah, you'd be visited by some people afterwards and ask some direct questions about your psychological stability.
Let's get to the good part, which is Lou and his colleagues, and there are a long list of people who have been part of this conversation. And he thanks them all in his acknowledgments at the end. And I'm sure they're very pleased to have all the facts laid out finally for us. we get the Congress involved because the executive branch is not responding or is actively seeking to not only defame Lou, but to say he never worked there, to deny that he had anything to do with such an office, to deny everything. So it's moving to Congress that's necessary. Who is Chris Mellon, and what role does he play for this storytelling, Lou?
Wow. So Chris Mellon is probably one of the most intelligent human beings I have ever had the opportunity to meet and know personally. He's right up there at the same caliber of as General Jim Mattis. Um, uh, an American hero. This is a person who, it's not totally my story to tell, so I'll just hit the wave tops. Chris Mellon comes from the famous Mellon family. I didn't know it at the time. When I say Mellon family, think of Carnegie Mellon, Mellon Bank, Mellon University, Gulf Oil. And as a young man, he grew up really pretty tough. Actually, a lot of people think that he was, kind of born into this charmed life. He wasn't. He was actually born as a kind of a street fighter, to be honest with you, and didn't know for a very long time his relationship to the Mellon family. But he worked his way from really nothing all the way to being in the legislative branch, working as a senior staffer for then Bill Cohen, then who later brought him to the Pentagon to be the senior intelligence official at the Pentagon. And during that time, he had asked several times other staff members, what are we doing about UFOs? Very, very discreetly, do we have a UFO program? And it was always no, 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 nothing to see here. And it wasn't until later on when he realized our program existed and he came into the Pentagon, he realized that the programs were real and that we were collecting data almost on a daily basis. And he got very, very frustrated. And I remember that conversation. And I think it was at that moment he felt this requirement, this urge to help the chain of command and the bureaucracy work this issue more diligently, but also inform the American public and make sure that Congress was being informed. He is the reason why we are here today. If there was one person besides Senator Harry Reid and a few others, Chris Mellon's the reason why we're having this conversation in Congress. Chris Mellon's the reason why I think the media now is finally taking this topic seriously. Chris Mellon is the reason why people are coming forward and blowing the whistle, people that were involved in the legacy program and talking to Congress and other elements within the government. So I don't know what else to say other than that he is a true American hero and a national treasure.
Yes, because what we have here is a body of evidence. We have over here decision makers in the Congress, and in between is an apparatus, generation after generation, that is better at denial than it is at clarity, much better. And that's one of the plots within Lou's book that's helpful. All these years of being frustrated, why there's been never been a successful audit of the Pentagon, why
Correct.
the programs cost so much and don't seem to make us safer. Well, Lou's a glimpse at that. And once they acknowledged the fact that you existed, the story moved a little bit, but still, I thought, oh, well, now they've got to Congress. Something's going to happen. Marco Rubio, Chuck Schumer, good heavens, these are heavyweights. But still, they passed legislation after legislation. What is this? 2021, in the early days of the pandemic, 2022, you read it into the budget, and every time you read it into the budget, some group at the Pentagon finds a way to deny you. And I have to believe that that's the way they're trained. That's their orders, Lou. It's not just ornery people. Help me understand that.
Sure. Well, look, this is a repeated pattern. This is nothing new. If one only has to look at recent history, whether it's Iran-Contra or the Pentagon Papers or the Afghanistan withdrawal. The Pentagon and our military-industrial complex has a long history of deceiving the American public. And I don't want to paint with a broad stroke the whole government or just even the Department of Defense or the intelligence community, because that's not fair. There are pockets within the government that are working counter to what I believe is counter to the interests of the American people. They are working in a way where they're making decisions unilaterally rather than informing the chain of command, rather than informing Congress, rather than doing what they're supposed to do. They're making the unilateral decision to keep information secret or withheld, and not for the reasons you might think. We keep information secret for two reasons: to protect sources and to protect methods. It is illegal, actually illegal, to keep information secret or classified to protect malfeasance or to try to cover something that's embarrassing. And yet, time and time again, we continue to see this. We see the abuse of the classification system to cover the tracks of malfeasance. And so this was one of the concerns I had. We were spending taxpayer money looking for these UFOs. It was sponsored by the senator, Senator Harry Reid. It was, by the way, bipartisan. Senator Harry Reid, Senator Ted Stevens, and Senator Inouye, right? And yet still the Pentagon was denying the fact that this effort was even going on. And you can imagine the frustration both the folks in Congress had, who were the sponsors of this program, and the people doing the work, such as myself and my colleagues, when our own chain of command said, listen, keep doing what you're doing quietly, but don't tell anybody. Well, we have to, because we're having problems. We're literally having UAP splitting right down the middle combat air formations. Now think how close you have to be to split two F-18s flying in a combat formation, right? Something is going to happen here. We were getting pleas from the field saying, literally on classified email, hey, what do you want me to do, Lou? What do you want me to do, Jay? Because I can't keep people below deck forever. These things, these UAP are all over the ship, right? And so it became really the worst kept secret. And so that, I think, was the greatest frustration I saw, was that our own bureaucracy, there were decision makers not wanting this conversation to occur. And even after I left the Department of Defense, as you say, that effort continues. To this day, there is a member of the public affairs team at the Pentagon who is responsible for this topic, who is a colonel and trained in psychological operations, who, by the way, I won't mention the person's name, who wrote a thesis that actually says towards the end, you cannot separate propaganda from the roles and responsibilities of public affairs. Now, think about that. This is somebody who is trained in propaganda and has stated for the record that it is okay to mix propaganda when you're informing the American people through public affairs. That is illegal. That is exactly the antithesis of what the Public Affairs Office is supposed to do. And yet time and time again throughout history, we continue to see these elements doing the same thing, not just with UFOs, but with other topics.
President Biden signed not one, but two laws from the House and the Senate that are vehicles for clarity, for stating the facts. And neither of those have been adequate to get at it. So there's something more. The Constitution doesn't help me here. Is there some place we can go to get? We have to go to the courts. What is the explanation that the President of the United States signing legislation from the Congress can't get the Pentagon to obey?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, there's a mindset that some presidents are what they consider temporary hires. I know it sounds absolutely bonkers, but the reality is that there are individuals in the, and not to make light of it, but there's actually a term that we use in the Pentagon, and these people call themselves weebies. We be here before you, and we be here after you leave. And basically, there's this mindset that the politicians in our country and the leadership in our country are quote unquote temporary hires. They're here for 4 years and then they're likely gone. So there is no need to necessarily brief these individuals into some of these efforts that are ongoing. And by the way, like I said, it's really not that unusual. There are many, many examples in the last even decade where presidents have not been briefed to certain things that we've been doing. Well, look, they weren't briefed to mine. They weren't briefed to our program, ATIP. They weren't briefed to OSAP. I mean, that's a classic example right there.
There are people to credit and to success as it's gone so far. I want to mention in particular Helene Cooper, Leslie Kean, I believe, Kean, and Ralph Blumenthal, who've written not one, not two. I've read 3 stories. There might be a 4th. I didn't have time to click through everything. There is information coming out. It's not pouring out. You have to look for it, but it gets clearer and clearer that there's more to investigate than we have ever dreamed. Imminent inside the Pentagon's hunt for UFOs. I started this book thinking this will be entertaining, and by the end, I came to a revelation. This is not only not entertaining, this is maddening, because we're not getting transparency from the government that we support. And why not? Now, we've done what we can, the history so far from when Lou was first read into the program in 2009 until this moment, but still no clarity. Lou, what is the legacy program?
So the legacy program is a term that's used to loosely define the historic UFO, UAP efforts of the US government, and also the efforts by certain defense contractors, aerospace contractors, to try to glean some information and exploit this technology and try to understand how this technology works. And that is referred to as the legacy program.
And the legacy program has facts, has objects, might have organic beings in some fashion, has materials, all of which exist and have existed in time. Where are they? Do we have a guess, Lou?
So the artifacts you are referring to, material artifacts, are pieces that were recovered from an event, a crash, and that crash, for all practical purposes, does not appear to be a conventional technology. It does not appear to be one of our technologies, and we're pretty certain it's not an adversarial technology. And the material has been initially, when you have an event, the material is usually taken away very quickly and secured at a military installation somewhere where the U.S. government can secure it. And then at that point goes out to the various organizations, scientific communities within the government for further analysis and testing. Unfortunately, I can't discuss specific locations. I have not been given clearance. What you see in the book is what the Pentagon has cleared me to talk about. And even then, you can see there are some redactions in the book that they did not want me to discuss. So I have to be very, very careful how I answer your question, because if it's not in the book, I have not been given clearance to elaborate or pontificate.
That's the information I wanted, Lou. You just delivered it. What is a DIRD? DIRDs.
Yeah, DIRD is basically a research paper from DIA, the Defense Intelligence Research document that looks at a issue du jour, for example. If the government wants to know how a Russian hypersonic cruise missile works, someone will submit a DIRD, which is a research paper on how a Russian hypersonic missile works. Fuel consumption, altitude, velocity, things like that. And so in our case, there were nearly 38 DIRDs that were produced in the early days of OSAP, early days of ATIP, in order to try to ascertain what technologies we would need in order to replicate some of the performance characteristics of these UAP.
And those papers exist, and they're speaking to facts that have been accumulated. So I just wanted to make certain I understood what they're used for. In other words, someone somewhere, generation after generation, is aware that there's a vital material to be exploited, and they're considering that, but we still don't know. So I'm now just at this moment want to give you an opportunity to speak to the public and say what you want to do next and what the public can do to help you next. The way I come to think of it at the end, Lou, to be a member of the public, is that if it's not real, show me. If it's real, show me. The only people who don't know these things are the public that pay for you. What do you want to happen, Lou?
Correct. Well, first of all, Mr. Batchelor, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I also want to state that my book should not be considered an end. It should be considered the beginning. This is only the primer to get this conversation moving in the right direction. Two, my father, before he passed away, told me the number one threat to any society is corruption, whether it's financial corruption, religious corruption, moral corruption, governmental corruption. Anytime someone in government gives up or trades in a value, core value they have in exchange for something else, they are chiseling away at the very foundation of what a democracy is. And as my father told me, it's a very slippery slope from that to tyranny. So my message to the American public is to, if you want change, don't get mad at the government, because we have a government that is technically for the people and by the people and representative of the people. get involved. Talk to your elected officials. Tell them you are interested in disclosure. I believe personally that the American public, I believe that America can handle the truth and deserves the truth, very much like you. And I think if they were to call their elected officials or send them an email or send them a letter and say, look, we want truth behind whatever the truth is, we want the truth. I think that's a good place to start. And I think we need to encourage people to start having this conversation, realize there are forces still in the government that will use proxies that do not want this conversation to occur. They are very sophisticated. They will continue to employ these tactics to try to diminish individuals' reputations and credibility. Recognize that up front, but have the courage to get involved in this topic. Have the courage to start engaging your elected officials and telling them that this is an important topic for you. I think we can all agree that transparency and accountability is something that we all want from our government, whether it's UFOs and UAP or anything else.
Book is imminent. Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. Luis Elizondo is the author, and here's a tip. Don't use the acronym UFO. Use the up-to-date one, UAP, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. You'll get respect. This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.